Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the FireWife Summit tonight, where we're going to be talking about support for PTSD and mental health, and especially how it pertains to us in the family life and things that we can do to help at home and make transitions home better and just make everybody a lot more happier all the way around. I'd like to do a huge thank you to my sponsors who have allowed me to keep this event free for everybody. MomWeb's hosting, Carney Strong, Multimedia Content Solutions, Mouse Ear Magic Travel, Laura Sierra, Appetite for Design, and Stitching the Night Away. Thank you so much for making it so that I could reach out to more spouses and the fire families and get this out to more people. So for our first session tonight, I have the wonderful retired Captain Jeff Dill here to talk to us from Firefighter Behavior Health Alliance. I want to make sure
I know it's a mouthful. I know.
It is.
FBHA. Just stick with FBHA.
Right? And instead of doing a big introduction to him, I just want to say a huge thank you. And I'm not positive if I had told you this before, but you were one of the main reasons that this is actually taking place. And that is because I've had so many wives work with you or have been in contact with you. And I knew that you were the one person that I really wanted to have at this event. So I kind of had this thing of, well, if Jeff can do it, then we're a go.
I appreciate that. I thought it might have been the $50 I sent you to try to get me on this list.
No, definitely. I love that you're so willing to work with so many other people, and I love that I do hear your name around the community so much. So without further ado, Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and let you just go ahead and take it because you do this a lot.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Val. And once again, I'm honored to be here and leading off this wonderful conference. Before we get started, I know everyone can type. I'd like to ask a question, and that question is, when you hear the term firefighter, what words come to your mind? So if you could type those in there and I can read them, or Val can see them and read them, but I think I should be able to. Just type those in, and then we'll talk about that in a few seconds after I do my intro. I am a retired fire captain from the Northwest Burbs of Chicago. I served up in the Palatine area, and I had 26 years on the job. I actually started as a volunteer way back in 1989 and moved into career in 95 and retired in 2015. While I was in my profession as a battalion chief, I went back, got my master's degree, and became a licensed counselor. So I see both sides of the wall for my brothers and sisters in the EMS and fire world. But in 2009, my wife and I, we founded Counseling Services for Firefighters. And this was based after Hurricane Katrina, when Division I outside Chicago sent down numerous firefighters in regard to helping out our brothers and sisters. And when they came back, I spoke to many of them. They said, hey, we saw so many things. We were picking up bodies in the streets. We were struggling with the animals that just littered the landscape, the devastation. And so they went to counselors and chaplains. And when they found out that, unfortunately, they didn't really understand our culture, they became frustrated and never went back. So that's when I decided to get my master's degree. And we founded Counseling Services for Firefighters in 2009 to train counselors and chaplains. Well, in 2010, we started receiving emails and phone calls from around the world saying, do you do anything about firefighter suicides? And I said, well, I didn't know we had a problem. And so I started doing a lot of research and found out that no organization in the United States was tracking these tragic events. And so in late 2010, early 2011, we founded FBHA. And we had three goals: educational workshops. We have a scholarship program for children of fire and EMS. And then our most endearing to my wife and I is our annual weekend retreat for family survivors. Once a week in the third week of May, we gather in different places across the United States. This year, coming up in 2020, we'll be in the Gulf Shores of Alabama. And on that Friday night, we hold what we call We Remember. And We Remember is we go down to the fire department, they pull their rigs out and they run their lights for 1 minute as our families stand there with pictures and candles. And we did it live. If you go back into May 17th on our Facebook, you'll see the video. We were in Heber City, Utah at the time. So this is what we do. I travel all over the United States. I have two other instructors, Jennifer Kramer and Robert Simons. And I was averaging, I still average about 100,000 air miles every year to bring this message. And why the validation process, we get this question a lot. When you track and validate firefighter and EMS suicides, if you go to our website at www.ffbha.org, on that front page, you will see a reporting system, a confidential reporting system. People fill that out and then they hit submit, and I have no idea where it comes from. The emails are scrubbed. I then take that data and that information and I contact the fire chiefs or EMS chiefs. So we have validated 1,395 of these tragic events. And I have personally spoken to over 1,320 fire and EMS chiefs to hear the stories, the methods, the reasons. And we take all this and we build workshops around that data. And hence, years ago, we found out that the number one known reason, unknown is number one, but the number one known reason for firefighters and EMS taking their lives was marital and family relationships. So that is where we created the Saving Those Who Save Others Family Edition. And like I said, it's one of my favorite workshops, training family members. No firefighters and EMS are allowed to attend. It's just them. And it's, like I said, one of my favorite ones because I can just talk and say, hey, this is why we act the way that we do and how it affects your family life. So that's a little something about us. And I do have to get my credit into my bride, who volunteers 30 to 40 hours a week. Without Karen, FBHA just doesn't work. So she's my support. We'll be celebrating 39 years coming up here in November. So that's a little something about us. All right, now I go back here and I'm just looking at. I asked you a question. And I'm looking at it. I see hero, caring, brotherhood, caretaker, heart for service, selfish. I do see one stressed, and I appreciate that. The one person who put stress, because I've asked this question for almost 10 years in training and teaching our brothers and sisters, and the comments I usually get are, well, they're heroic, they're selfish, they're all these type of things. And yet no one's ever said, well, they have addiction issues or they have anger issues. Someone's on, Val. Someone unmuted themselves. So, these words that we live by is what I call cultural brainwashing. And cultural brainwashing is not a negative term, but it's one that I believe in. And what I mean is that when we put this uniform on, this is how we're supposed to act. We're supposed to act brave and courageous and self-sacrificing. And why? Is because it's the expectations. It's the expectations of how we're supposed to act. And who expects that? Well, our brothers and sisters we work with, the communities we serve, the traditions of the fire and EMS. And when you're held to those expectations 24/7, it becomes you. And so now we start seeing all these expectations of how we're supposed to act. Now we're struggling with professional issues, calls that we've seen, addictions that we turn to, but also our personal lives. Maybe it's relationships, maybe it's health issues with our family, maybe it's financial, whatever it is. And if you're expected to act strong and brave and courageous and handle all things on your own, it's impossible to do. And this is where we start seeing our brothers and sisters falling prey to those other issues. Like I said, stress, anxiety, anger, and of course, family relationships is big. And now we start seeing more and more of our brothers and sisters taking their lives. So that cultural brainwashing is very difficult to overcome, and especially for family members to understand this type of thing. And understand there's always been a wall in the fire service and first responder world in general, but I'll keep it to the fire service. And that wall, on the one side is you have your firefighters and EMS, dispatchers, first responders, brave, strong, courageous. On the other side of the wall, you start seeing counselors and chaplains. And we always started mocking out or judging those who went to that side of the wall. And that's always perplexed me because our whole job is predicated on responding to those who call for help. So where did we go wrong that we could not ask for help for ourselves? And so this is, like I said, why we start seeing it. And it's our goal when we speak, and like I said, we speak all over, is to bring that message of that cultural brainwashing, understanding that this is still just a job. And I don't care if you're volunteer or career, because when we look at our data, there is no discrimination. It doesn't matter if it's career, volunteer, city, suburban, rural, male, female, ages, ranks, states, it doesn't care. And so every organization needs to have some type of behavioral health program. And within that behavioral health program, there needs to be some type of program for the families. And so one of the key things I hope that you'll take away from tonight, because it's one I truly believe in, it's called doing an internal size up. In fact, we named a workshop after many years ago. And doing an internal size up, and you can do this at home to our participants here, is that it means you have to ask yourself on a daily basis, why am I acting this way? Why am I angry? Why am I not sleeping? Why am I having nightmares? Why have I turned to addictions? Why am I having communication issues with my loved ones? And the best thing I tell my brothers and sisters is to listen to others, because they see us a lot better than we will ever see ourselves. I'll never forget when my wife said many years ago, she said, "Jeff, you seem to have changed, when I went career." I said, "That's not true. I'm still that bubbly 19-year-old you married in 1980. And heck no, that person's long gone. And it's not only because of the things that I saw on the job, but it's also because of those expectations of how we're supposed to act. And it's very difficult to overcome. And one of the things that we unfortunately do in the fire service is we tend to turn internal. We will not communicate. We have a difficult time communicating. We don't want people to think that we're weak. I've had so many firefighters who have called me for help saying, "Jeff, do you have a counselor in our area that I can go see?" And I'll ask them, "Well, what's your support at home?" "Oh, I can't tell them because I don't want my wife to think I'm weak." And they'll start tearing up. And it's just, there's a disconnect there, and we need to break that. And somehow, and like I said, one of the best ways is to educate our family members. So that internal size up is absolutely key. And another thing we absolutely try to teach our brothers and sisters is learn how to listen. And that's a role reversal for us. Because when the tones go off and we're dispatched, we respond, we try to help resolve the issue, whatever it is, get back into service, get back to the station, tones go off, we respond, we're trying to resolve the issue. And it becomes us. When you do that day in and day out, week after week, month after month, year after year, you fall prey to that aspect. And so when I tell them, please just try to learn how to listen. If your loved ones comes to you and says, "Hey, I had a rough day and I'd like to talk," they don't want you to resolve their issues. They want you just to listen to what their issues are. And so listening is key. And one thing I tell them, and you can do this as a couple, I think it would be fabulous. One way to practice to learn how to listen is, and it all came when my first class ever for my master's degree, the professor walked into the classroom and said, "Pick out someone in the class. I want you to stand 6 inches away from them for a minute and a half. You can't look elsewhere. You can't talk. You can't listen, or you can't smile or anything. If you do, I had 30 seconds. Well, there was one group up there for over 7.5 minutes. And what it taught us was that silence is uncomfortable, but silence is golden. And it is uncomfortable. How many of you have ever been in an elevator with 3 or 4 people that you didn't know? What are you typically doing? Well, you're looking down at the carpet, you're looking down at your phone, even though you have no cell connection. Why can't we sit and talk to each other? And this is an issue that we have in the fire service, is why can't we talk to our brothers and sisters when we know that they're struggling? So the exercise I recommend is DVR a 30-minute show and put closed caption on it, and then play it back and see if you can focus on what the show is and not reading the words. And I tell my brothers and sisters, I guarantee you, your family, your loved ones will absolutely adore you because you'll have learned how to listen. But I can guarantee you, many of you will fail because we're trained to look at the words. And so when your loved one is talking to you and speaking from their heart, there's no subtitles. You have to listen to every word they say. And so, try that and say, hey, I looked once, I looked twice. Why do you think uh, the news stations and ESPN and they all have Weather Channel? They all have that going across the bottom because they realize people retain more from their eyes. But when you're in a one-to-one conversation, either with another brother or sister or a loved one, guess what? There's no subtitles. You have to hear every key word, and it takes time. It takes training for that, and that's something that, unfortunately, we're very poor at. Especially, I was thinking about writing a book years ago called Two Strikes, You're Out, and one is because 96% of the fire service are males, and the other reason is because we're males. And so it's very difficult to learn how to listen. So I tell them, please practice. And that's one way that you can do that with your loved one. So a lot of people ask us about our stats, and we'll talk about a few other things, including warning signs, but let's look at the stats that we do have because it's very, very serious. We estimate about a 50 to 55% reporting to FBHA. And like I said, I've spoken to well over 1,300 fire and EMS chiefs to hear the stories and methods and reasons. But when we look at 2019, we're at 87 firefighters and 15 EMS. And for us, EMS is private ambulance service. Last year, we validated 89 and 21. So, and I still have 12 more to validate for 2019. So for some reason, we had a nice decline from our high point in 2015, where we had 116 firefighters who took their lives reported to FBHA. Are there more? Absolutely. Where we feel we miss out is on the volunteer side. So, because I've spoken to medical examiners, and those issues are that they don't ask if they were volunteer firefighters. They just put down what their main job is. So then in 2016, we had 105 reported to us. 2017, 103, and like I said, last year, 89. And we're at 87 this year, and I still have another 12 to validate. So it's scary. And first responder families should be worried. And it's suicide, taking of their lives is the last aspect. How many are struggling with stress and anxiety and with depression and addictions? And I believe all that starts that cultural brainwashing in our fire academies. So one thing I talk about, like I said, with our stats, and you'll see it all over the place. Whenever anyone quotes the amount of firefighter suicides, they only get it from us. FBHA is that number. But these are not numbers. These are the faces and the names of our brothers and sisters and the families they left behind. And so that's why it's so important for our mission is to educate spouses and family members on what to look for within their loved ones. When we last note on stats is that in the last, since 2015, we have validated exactly 500 firefighter suicides at a 50 to 55%, where line of duty deaths have only been 400 and at a 100%. So like I said, I take this very serious. Even though I like to joke around and things, my wife calls me Johnny Carson at home. I take this very, very serious in what I do. So let's look at top 5 warning signs for both firefighters and both spouses. I interviewed over 500 of our brothers and sisters that were struggling with addictions, PTS, depression, and suicide. And the top 5 warning signs, in no particular order, number 1 is recklessness and impulsiveness. Now, I don't believe in guns. I don't mind that people have them. But you break into my house, you get a Louisville Slugger across the back of your head. I'll be in a stealth mode. You'll never hear me coming. But if I was to walk in the firehouse one morning and say to my brothers and sisters, hey, I was just over at the gun show the other day and I bought a couple of handguns, the questions automatically should be, really, why? What's going on? Why'd you buy guns? But in reality, the real questions are, hey, what caliber did you buy? Are we going shooting and things like this? And I teach our brothers and sisters that we have to start using our gut instinct when it comes to emotions and behaviors. We do a great job when we're working with our patients or structure fires and things. We can read those signs and symptoms of what's going on, but we have to start really looking within ourselves. And one of the things I talk about is be direct, challenge with compassion, and do that internal size up. So those three things I really impress upon to the families is those same things, is be direct, challenge with compassion, and do that internal size up. And you can do it together. So recklessness, impulsiveness. The second one is anger. And I can speak a little bit with experience. I know my wife's on the line, but I can speak a little bit with experience on anger. It's amazing how what we see at the job, how easy it is for us to take home. So very easy. And one question I always ask my brothers and sisters, I say, how easy is it for us to express emotions? And they all, oh, very difficult, very difficult. And then I say, well, what about anger? That's an emotion. And they swallow their words and say, yep, we're very good at expressing that. And I'm sure many of you are probably shaking your heads. That anger, how and why we bring it home, I fell prey to it too. And I don't think that's the first thing you want to hear or see when they come in off a 24-hour or 48-hour shift is, hey, you can't believe these idiots on these calls, or you can't believe the way the board or the district or city is trying to screw it with our contract and things. And that anger just builds and builds. And to the point where how many families are really going to take it? And so anger is an issue that we need to really address in the fire service within ourselves. And we do that by that internal size up. But understand at times, anger, it can mask fear. And anger, that masking fear, and I look at it, within myself, masking fear is, I was an officer 23 out of 26 years of my career. I was not this, great God of an officer and thought I was the all being and almighty and things like that. But I always felt I should be prepared. And if I wasn't prepared, I equated that to failure. And so when I get in an argument with my wife and it gets to that height of that argument, back and forth, and all of a sudden I realize, oh my God, she might be right. Oh, how do I handle this one? Do I back down and apologize and let her hold it over my head for the next 3 or 4 months? Not an option. I get louder and louder till she storms off and I claim victory, even though I know I'm wrong. Why? Because I don't want to admit that I failed. And it's very difficult in this fire service to say that you're weak or you failed on something. And so understanding that anger and doing that internal size up is absolutely key. So when we look at the third one, isolation, maybe some of you have started seeing your loved ones start to isolate. Maybe they don't go out to big parties and crowds or concerts. They don't like to be around people. Loud noises really start putting them, and they become introverted. Where they used to be this outgoing person, now they're introverted. And all these things come into play with isolation. I think it's actually one of the easiest things to see in the brother and sisterhood is how we start to isolate from not only the job and things on the job, but also our loved ones at home. So watch out for that. Loss of confidence and skills. This one kind of surprised me when I interviewed. These were engineers that were struggling with issues at home. They couldn't remember how to put their rigs in pump. They couldn't remember how to flow water. And so all these issues started really coming into play. And then the last issue in the top 5 was sleep. I don't know how many, by a show of hands, you can type it in there, how many of your loved ones have any type of sleep issues. And unfortunately, it doesn't get any better in retirement. So 2 questions I always love to ask my brothers and sisters is, how many of you sleep with a fan? And I get a good 60-70% sleeping with a fan. And then I always ask them, and you can say, when you go out to dinner with your loved ones and you're in your own personal vehicle, how many of you back in to the parking stalls? And absolutely, I see a show of hands there. And it's that cultural brainwashing that comes into play. And I tell them, if you're doing those little things like sleeping with a fan and sleeping issues and backing into parking stalls with your, guess what? The big ones are there too. And that's the addictions, the depression, the post-traumatic stress. the stress and anxiety, those are there as well. And we need to make sure that we do that internal size up. Now, it's different for everyone. It's different levels of degrees of effect on everyone. But I'm a firm believer, you're in this job, you struggle with these issues. And so these are some of the things that we point out when we start talking about behavioral health. Now, when we start looking at the families, when we start talking to spouses and partners, their top 5, well, anger was one of them. And anger in a different aspect, just the behaviors of how they acted around the house, towards the families, how it created issues within their relationship with their children. And I'll never forget how easy it is to bring anger home. We went on a very minor vehicle accident one day, and it was wet, and the mother had 2 boys in the back seat. And she hit the brakes and slid a little on the wet pavement into a truck in front of her. A minor damage, and the boys, though, they were, I think, around 6 and 8. They didn't have their seatbelt on, and they bounced off the front of the front seat, the back of the front seat. And she wanted to have them checked out. So not 2 weeks later, I'm driving with my daughters, and I believe they were older. They were like 14, 16, or 13 and 15. And I look in the back, and one of them had taken off their seatbelts to reach for something on the ground. And what do you think my reaction was? It was, are you kidding me? If I have to hit the brakes, you're going to fly like a missile through this windshield. And I look in the rearview mirror, and they got that evil dad's back stare. And it's that easy that we bring these things home to our families. So anger was one of them. Jealousy was number 2. And jealousy from the aspect that the fire department's become the number 1 family. They're always there to help out their brothers and sisters. They're always jovial and joking around at the station when you call them. And yet when they get home, it's like, oh man, who is this person? I don't recognize you. And so they became jealous that, hey, it seems like you'd rather be at the station. You're having more fun there. And now you come home and to your loved ones and you treat us like this. So they started becoming very jealous of the department being the number 1. Another one was trust, or lack of trust in what they will follow through with. So many said, oh yeah, I'll change. I'll go to counseling. I'll stop drinking less. And yet it never happened. And so they lost faith in their loved ones. And understand that divorce is very high in the first responder world. And I haven't done a study on it, but there's several studies out there that say anywhere between 50 to 70% of first responders end up in divorce court. And when I see the way that my brothers and sisters act, and at times I do as well, I can understand that. So trust that they will say and do what they will do. Another one is abandonment. The spouses felt that they were abandoned, meaning that they were just not number 1 in that priority in their life. They were an afterthought when it came to decision making. So very, very difficult to hear spouses talk about those words. And the last one was just the emotional disconnect as in a relationship. And that's pretty tough when your game plan is different now. That emotional disconnect. You know, what was once one decision and communications is now separated emotionally. And so those were the top 5 warning signs that we saw in our spouses when I talked to them about that. Very, very difficult to help. Some of the things that we recommend, of course, are challenge with compassion, be direct, talk to your loved ones. Another one that we really highly recommend, and we've had a lot of success with this, families calling us, is we all know what a structured timeout is. If you've had children, you probably know what a structured timeout is. But I started using this in this atmosphere, this arena of maybe spouses can allow their loved ones when they get home from shift, give them 15 minutes, maybe a half an hour at the most of a structured timeout. Meaning they can come home, they can eat dinner, they can shower without that that you walk in and the first thing people say, hey, I need you to do this. I need you to do this. I got to go do this and this and that. And I think we become overwhelmed, and that's a problem. And so maybe if there's just that, hey, 15 minutes, hey, how you doing? You're going to take a shower, you're going to eat or something, walk the dog or whatever it is, and give them that time to reacclimate themselves back to home, because it's a different world once we step into that fire station. It's a world of hurt and pain. Yes, there's some, laughter and joy when we work with our brothers and sisters, but there's a lot of stress and anxiety. You never know what the next call is going to be. And then if they're struggling with personal issues, all this adds up very quickly in our world. So a structured timeout is one of the big ones that we really discuss. I know I'm probably running over my time here, Val, but
that's okay.
like I said, there's so much to talk about in regard to the way that we act and how it affects our loved ones. I also tell first responders to talk to your children. Let them know why you act the way that you do and what's expected of you on the job, what's expected you of on the calls, and let them know, yes, I have training, because I believe children become very anxious and anxiety ridden when they hear that their mother or father is responding to some structure fire. And then because Facebook is right there, you can see and hear things on Facebook almost instantaneously. And if they know that their mom or dad is on a call and all of a sudden on Facebook says 3 firefighters injured at this fire, that stress and anxiety level. So talk to your children, as a couple or as a first responder, have them talk to them, explaining what their job is and why they act that way at times because of the stress and anxiety of the job. So all these things come into play very quickly. Val, do you have any question for me?
I do not have any questions for you. You hit a
I know I hit a lot.
stuff.
I hit a lot in a half an hour. I know,
but not overwhelming. No, just you had to give us that whole first feedback. That's
right.
why you gave it in a tall order. And yeah, I know that a lot of what you were saying is, especially in the last, because we're working on almost 20 years between volunteer and paid now, and a lot's changed in the last few years, definitely.
Oh, and absolutely. And like I said, I started as a volunteer, and I know the demands of the volunteer. That is, those calls that if you sign up in the middle of the night, and I used to wake up my wife all the time. Hey, was that the pager? Did I miss the pager? And or we would be out shopping, and the tones go off, and I'm on shift, so I would just leave her there at the mall and head off to the call. Or one Christmas Eve, she planned this humongous party, and about 5 o'clock we got called out for a barn fire. And we were there till midnight, and so I missed the whole party.
Yeah.
And so all those things come into play for our brothers and sisters in the fire and EMS and dispatcher world. We started collecting dispatchers that have taken their lives this year and understanding those stressors. They hear the calls, but they don't see them, and we know how good our mind is. One thing I want to wrap up on here, and that's post-traumatic stress. PTS is become very, it's those 4 little letters, PTSD, has become very to the top in the fire service. It's moved up rather quickly. And I highlight this very strongly in our workshops, all our workshops. We go through the criteria of under the Diagnostic Statistics Manual is what we use as counselors. And anyone out there that are counselors listening, they'll know what I'm talking about. And that's our Bible to help diagnose and give recommendations for therapy. We go through those criteria. So I would recommend to those listeners here tonight to Google those the DSM-5 and look up the criteria for PTSD and go through it with your loved ones. Just to say, hey, you know what? I see this in you. Do you see this in you? These are the criteria that if you went to a counselor, they would look for to see if you're diagnosed with PTSD. And I do that because I don't want my brothers and sisters to be afraid of those 4 little letters. I want them to take control of their life, just like we do when we get to the scenes. We take control of those events. And to understand, let's not be afraid of those 4 little letters. Get the help and understand it. Someone does it get any better when they retire? You know, retirement, and I'll talk about retirement in a second, but I just want to finish this on PTSD. Yes, there have been firefighters that have been fired because they were diagnosed with PTSD, but you're also seeing a lot more states now have workman's comp covering our PTSD issues that we struggle with. Understand, this is still new to us. Like I said, in 2011, when we first talked in front of Philadelphia Fire Department, no one was talking about PTSD and suicide except FBHA. And so it's all still very new, considering when you look at the length of how long the fire service has been around. So take a look at that DSM-5. One of the therapies, two of them that we kind of recommend, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And the big one, though, is EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and oh, she's now it's escaped me. See, it happens when you get old, but it's EMDR. And what it is I have firefighters calling me every week, and they say, I need a counselor. And so I'll find a counselor in that area. I always look for a counselor that is EMDR trained. And so thank you, Shelley. It's reprocessing. I knew that word would come, desensitization and reprocessing. And it's just a way of moving your eyes back and forth, either to light or audio, and it configures the brain so that we refile things instead of sitting by it. And so I'm very big on EMDR. So if you're looking for a counselor in your area, if the wives want to create a resource list for their loved ones, look for counselors that are EMDR. And it only takes anywhere between 3 to 4 sessions, but it's a living hell those first couple sessions, because they take you back into that place. And so that's just real quick on PTSD. Retirement. Out of our data, 245 retirees that we have validated, 37 took their lives within the first week of retirement. This is an issue. We need to address this within our organizations. Instead of just throwing them a party and giving them an axe on a piece of board, we need to start a year and a half, 2 years out, pre-planning. What does retirement look for? What can we do? What recommendations can we make? And so that is another issue that we talk about. In fact, like I said, we create workshops based on the data. And when we started seeing our brothers and sisters in retirement taking their lives, we formed Saying Goodbye, the Emotional Detachment. And it's very difficult. We need to, when you're 25, 30 years going on calls, whether it's career or volunteer, and now that's gone instantly, what we found are the 3 key issues in our retirees, and that was loss of identity, loss of belonging, and lack of purpose. And that is very difficult issues to deal with. When you're saying goodbye and you see that engine in that rear view mirror for the last time, knowing you'll never ride that engine again, or shift commander, we need to start working on retirees and what we can do. And so many, I tell retirees, hey, get involved. Maybe you want to join peer support teams. You know, we see a lot of retirees joining peer support teams. We start seeing them joining CERT teams, the community emergency response teams. They do fundraisers for volunteer departments. But a year and a half before you retire, you know, go see a guidance counselor. All they really want to do, it's like a high school guidance counselor. Hey, what do you want to do when you retire? Because most of us are retiring in our mid-50s. We have 25, 30 years left to live. And so what are we going to do? You can only golf and fish and things so much before that adrenaline. And believe me, that's where the key is that adrenaline rush, because that's an addiction, adrenaline. And when those tones go off, our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up. And when that's gone, and now you're sitting at home and you have no one to talk to because you've never talked to your loved one at home about any calls, it becomes very difficult to deal with. And so retirement is a key component that for resources, for wives that are forming groups or for their own departments, please don't forget about that.
Mm-hmm. Now, retirement's been big on us. I'm super excited that my husband has gone in with quite a few retirees. So I feel like in one part, hopefully that's going to help with that transition. For one, they're still talking to him and he's still working, but for another, I'm hoping as he's watching and talking to them more that, you know, maybe that'll just start that whole cycle with everybody.
And,
But we did worry about our captain when he retired.
right.
They've, you
Right.
know, they've been paranoid. They bug him all the time, you know, come over for dinner.
Well, and it's a valid point. You know, from, like I said, from my point of view, I'm surrounded by death on a daily basis. People sending emails, text messages, firefighters and EMS that have taken their lives, and it's not just to the active; it's those that were resigned, fired, on duty injuries. That's not how they plan their career to end, and so they struggle with these issues.
Mm-hmm.
But if anyone, I know you have another guest coming on. I've way over my limit, but our website is, of course, www.ffb as in Bravo, ha.org, so ffbha.org. And my email is jdill@ffbha.org. So if anyone has any comments or questions, that's how I can be reached.
And I will send out more information. I will have everything in the email tomorrow with all of the information on there and how you can get a hold of them as well. And I'm sure I'll have more information from Jeff as the weeks progress, because I've got you guys on the list, so I can get questions from you and start helping by answering more questions as well.
Well, I see we have one person harassing me, Mimi's phone.
Yeah, I know that Mimi.
that Mimi, that's my bride for anyone. She says, don't forget your cell phone, and that number is 847-209-8208. So,
And
otherwise,
she did put it on there because she obviously wants
okay.
everybody to call you.
Right. Well, that's no problem. That's you know, we're all given a path in life, and this is the one that was given to me, and I cherish it. It's hard work, but my wife supports me, and she's just tremendous. FBHA doesn't run without my wife, Karen. So
nice.
I appreciate it, Val. To everyone out there, I am absolutely honored to be here to speak in front of you, just give you about 45-minute perspective of our world and how it affects you.
And I really appreciate you being in here and giving us the other side of the view that we don't get. You know, we get them when they come home, and yeah, we can assume we know what is happening and
Right.
and what's being brought home, but it helps to have your perspective and say, yeah, we're either right or yeah, we might be wrong.
Right.
But here's how we might be able to fix it.
Right, and absolutely, and it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time, and change as we know, and this is change that would be for the better. So.
Definitely. All starts with conversation.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
No problem.
I appreciate it.
Take care, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.